Martin Luther King Jr.'s early life began with a deep connection to faith, community, and the racial realities of America. He was born on January 15th, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia, into a world where segregation shaped daily life for African Americans. His birth name was Michael King Jr., but later his father changed both their names to Martin Luther King, inspired by the German reformer Martin Luther. From the very beginning, King grew up surrounded by church responsibilities, intellectual curiosity, and the powerful influence of parents who believed in dignity, equality, and discipline. King's early home environment played a huge role in shaping his sense of justice. His father, Martin Luther King Sr., was a respected pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church and a strong voice against racial injustice. King often watched his father confront everyday discrimination with firmness and calm courage. One well-known memory from his childhood involved a shoe store owner who demanded that young King and his father move to the back of the store to be served. King's father refused, saying they would leave rather than accept humiliation. These moments, though simple, built the foundation of King's lifelong defiance toward inequality. His mother, Alberta Williams King, was gentle but strong, a talented musician and a schoolteacher. She exposed King to classical music, books, and structured learning from a young age. She constantly reminded him that he was as good as anyone, a message that pushed back against the world outside their home, where segregation laws tried to tell black children otherwise. King later said that his mother gave him a sense of worth, which never left him. King grew up in a relatively comfortable, middle-class black neighborhood called Sweet Auburn, known for its thriving black businesses and civic leaders. Though segregation limited opportunities, the community around him was full of ambition and education. He attended segregated schools, but despite the limitations, he excelled academically. Teachers quickly noticed his intelligence, curiosity, and ability to learn quickly. Yet King's early life was not without emotional struggles. One of the most shaping incidents of his childhood happened when a white friend's parents forbade the boys from playing together because of race. King was deeply hurt and confused. This early rejection left a lasting mark, making him aware of racial injustice not just as a social problem, but as a personal wound. He later described this moment as one of the first times he truly understood the painful force of segregation. Another influential moment occurred when King was about 6 years old. He overheard his parents discussing racial violence and discrimination around the country. Even though he was young, the seriousness in their voices began shaping his awareness. His parents wanted to understand the world fully, even the harsh parts, so he could navigate with strength and purpose. King's personality as a child mixed innocence with early maturity. He was known for being confident, polite, and somewhat independent. People around him noticed his strong speaking abilities, even before he became a teenager. He often questioned things adults said, especially when something did not seem fair or logical. His father encouraged his curiosity, telling him that asking questions was part of learning. At the age of 5, King began attending Young Street Elementary School, and very soon he proved to be advanced for his age. He later skipped 9th and 12th grades. His drive for learning started early and remained constant throughout his life. Books were his frequent companions, and he developed an early interest in philosophy, religion, and social issues. Church played a central role in King's early life. He spent many hours watching his father preach powerful sermons about justice, compassion, and community leadership. The energy inside the church, the music, the speeches, and the unity of the congregation left a deep impression on him. While he did not immediately feel called to be a preacher, these experiences planted seeds that would grow stronger later. King also witnessed firsthand how the black church served as more than a place of worship. It was a community center, a meeting space, and a refuge from the racism of the outside world. This strong connection between faith and activism became one of the defining features of his leadership as an adult. Despite the challenges around him, King enjoyed parts of his childhood like any other boy. He played football and baseball with neighborhood friends, rode his bicycle, and enjoyed singing in the church choir. His childhood had balance, academic pressure, social awareness, but also play and joy. One of the most emotional parts of his early years came when his grandmother, Jenny Celeste Williams, passed away. King was deeply attached to her, and he took her death very hard. The event caused him intense grief and made him think seriously about life and purpose. Even at a young age, it forced him to reflect on mortality and emotional strength, themes that later appeared in his speeches. The Great Depression also shaped the environment of his childhood, though his family managed to maintain stability. He saw neighbors lose jobs and face hardships. These realities taught him early lessons about economic struggles and community support. By the time King reached his early teens, he was already known for his discipline, strong moral compass, and thoughtful personality. His home life remained stable, filled with daily prayers, reading, music, and structure. His parents continued guiding him toward excellence, reminding him that education would be one of his greatest tools against inequality. His early environment, rich in love, discipline, and awareness, prepared him for the extraordinary path he would walk. The combination of supportive parents, a strong community, early experiences with racism, and exposure to church leadership shaped a boy who would later become one of the most transformative figures in American history. King's early life was not glamorous, but was filled with powerful lessons, emotional turning points, and foundational values. These years carved his character, taught him resilience, and set him on a path toward leadership. Martin Luther King Jr.'s family played the most important role in shaping his values, personality, and understanding of the world. His home was filled with structure, discipline, and love, but it was also a place where he learned directly about the harsh realities of race in America. The people around him, his parents, grandparents, siblings, and extended community, gave him the emotional and intellectual foundation he carried throughout his life. King's father, Martin Luther King Sr., was more than a parent. He was a guide, teacher, and model of firmness in the face of injustice. Known to many as Daddy King, he was a powerful preacher who advocated for equality and refused to tolerate humiliation. He worked hard to provide stability for the family, becoming a respected leader at Ebenezer Baptist Church. His personality was strict yet loving, combining discipline with a strong sense of responsibility. King watched his father stand up against segregation many times, whether it was refusing to move to the back of a bus or correcting white police officers who tried to disrespect him. These moments taught King that courage did not always come from anger. It came from dignity. His mother, Alberta Williams King, was equally influential. A schoolteacher and talented musician, she filled the home with music, education, and emotional warmth. She encouraged curiosity, corrected mistakes gently, and reminded her children that they were valuable, intelligent, and capable. In a world that tried to shame black children, she insisted on building their confidence. Her calm and quiet strength balanced the forceful personality of King Sr., creating a stable environment where the children could grow. The King household also included King's older sister, Willie Christine King, and his younger brother, Alfred Daniel D. King. Christine was intelligent and organized, often serving as both sibling and early mentor to King. She helped him with reading, corrected his mispronunciations, and taught him discipline in schoolwork. A.D., meanwhile, was energetic and playful, bringing laughter and activity into the home. The bond between the siblings remained strong throughout their lives, with all three eventually becoming involved in ministry and activism. One of the most important figures in King's early life was his grandmother, Jenny Celeste Mama Williams, who lived with the family. She was gentle, spiritual, and nurturing. King adored her deeply. She read stories to him, sang hymns, and taught him lessons about patience and kindness. Her death when King was 12 devastated him. He blamed himself because the incident happened while he was playing around, and he struggled with guilt for a long time. The emotional impact of losing her at such a young age forced King to confront grief early, shaping his sensitivity and emotional maturity. King's life at home was full of routines. Mornings began with prayers and readings. Meals were shared together, and conversations often centered on education, faith, and community events. His parents insisted on good manners, proper speech, and strong discipline. King's father was known to use firm correction when necessary, but his intentions were always rooted in love and responsibility. The children were taught to respect everyone but never bowed down to injustice. Childhood events outside the home also shaped King's worldview. One of the earliest and most painful experiences came when a white friend's parents forbade the boys from playing together. King did not understand at first. When the friend explained that his parents said they were not allowed to associate with black children anymore, King felt stunned. He ran home crying, confused and hurt. His mother comforted him, saying, "You are as good as anyone else." But the emotional scar stayed with him. This moment marked the beginning of his deeper understanding of racial divides in America. Another significant moment occurred when the family traveled. Public transportation in the South was heavily segregated. King remembered once having to stand with his father while white passengers were allowed to sit. King Sr. strongly disliked these rules, but followed the law to avoid confrontation. King observed the tension on his father's face and realized how unfair laws force people into humiliating situations. These quiet observations shaped his belief that unjust laws needed to be challenged. The King family was also active in the community. Their church, Ebenezer Baptist, was a center of black life in Atlanta. King spent countless hours there, listening to sermons, helping with choir practice, attending meetings, and watching church leaders strategize around social problems. These activities taught him how communities organize, support one another, and fight for improvement. The church was not just a spiritual place. It was a nerve center for social activism. Despite these experiences with discrimination, King's child was not defined solely by struggle. He enjoyed sports, music, and friendships. He played football and baseball with neighborhood children and enjoyed riding his bicycle around the area. He even performed in the church choir during the performance of Gone with the Wind when he was 10 years old. His humor and kindness made him well-liked, and he developed leadership skills early by helping younger children and participating in group activities. King's family encouraged reading from an early age. Books filled the household shelves: religion, history, poetry, and philosophy. King became curious about the world beyond Atlanta. He asked countless questions, forcing his parents to explain everything from racial laws to moral values. These discussions made him intellectually mature long before many children his age. The family's middle-class status also shaped his understanding of inequality. King grew up comfortably, but he saw how many other black families struggle with poverty. Walking through the city, he noticed children without proper clothes, homes in poor condition, and adults working long hours for little pay. These contrasts helped him understand that racial inequality was closely connected to economic injustice. As King moved into his teen years, responsibilities increased. His father demanded excellence in school. His mother emphasized discipline and study habits. Church members expected him to lead younger children, read scripture, and participate in youth groups. All these responsibilities prepared him for future leadership roles. King's early exposure to racism, family values, emotional challenges, and community life shaped the person he would become. His home was full of love and guidance, but the world outside was full of injustice. Balancing these two realities taught him strength, empathy, and determination. These childhood experiences, both painful and joyful, formed the emotional core that would later push him to lead one of the most important movements in American history. Martin Luther King Jr.'s educational journey was marked by curiosity, discipline, and a deep desire to understand the world beyond his immediate experiences in Atlanta. Education shaped his voice, sharpened his thinking, and exposed him philosophies that later became the foundation of his leadership. Throughout his early years of schooling, King grew academically faster than his peers, eventually skipping grades and entering college at an unusually young age. But more importantly, his education introduced him to moral, spiritual, and intellectual giants whose ideas transformed his outlook on justice and nonviolence. King began formal schooling at Young Street Elementary School, where teachers quickly noticed his exceptional ability to learn. His mother, Alberta, had already taught him reading and writing at home, so he progressed quickly. When he moved to David T. Howard Elementary School, he continued performing at a high level. His teachers described him as a bright child with a strong sense of responsibility, someone who enjoyed discussion and asked thoughtful questions. By the time he reached Booker T. Washington High School, King was already academically advanced. The school was segregated, but despite limited resources, the teachers were highly dedicated and encouraged students to pursue excellence. King was known for his strong command of language and powerful speaking skills. He became involved in speech competitions, often impressing judges with his clarity, confidence, and ability to express complex ideas. His natural talent for public speaking was recognized long before he entered the ministry. King's intelligence allowed him to skip both the 9th and 12th grades, enabling him to enter college at the age of 15. This was possible through a special early admission program at Morehouse College, a prestigious historically black college in Atlanta. Morehouse was led by Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays, a towering intellectual figure who later became one of King's most important mentors. Morehouse College exposed King to a new world of ideas, debates, and philosophies. Although he initially had no intention of becoming a minister, believing that the church was not intellectually challenging enough, his perspective gradually shifted. Dr. Mays, the college president and a respected theologian, played a central role in this transformation. Mays believed deeply in equality, dignity, and nonviolence, and he taught that religion had a responsibility to address social injustice. His sermons and speeches stirred something inside King, making him rethink the role of faith and leadership. During his early years at Morehouse, King explored subjects such as sociology, literature, philosophy, and religion. He became increasingly aware of the broader world, reading works by Plato, Aristotle, Rousseau, and other influential thinkers. These readings expanded his understanding of ethics and morality. He also studied the works of black intellectuals like W.B. Du Bois, whose ideas on racial equality and the struggle for dignity resonated deeply with him. King earned his Bachelor of Arts in Sociology from Morehouse in 1948. His studies in sociology helped him understand how social systems, discrimination, and economic structures shaped human behavior. This knowledge later influenced the strategies he used during the Civil Rights Movement. After graduating, King attended Crozer Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania. This move took him out of the South for the first time and exposed him to a different social environment. At Crozer, he experienced less segregation, although racism still existed in many subtle ways. Despite this, the experience broadened his worldview. At Crozer, King studied Christian theology deeply. He read works by theologians such as Reinhold Niebuhr and Walter Rauschenbusch. Rauschenbusch's social gospel movement, which taught that Christianity must fight social injustice, had a major influence on him. Niebuhr's writings, which emphasized the realities of conflict and evil in society, also shaped King's developing understanding of human nature and moral struggle. One of the most transformative influences on King at Crozer was Mahatma Gandhi. King first encountered Gandhi's philosophy through discussions in seminary classes and through writings on nonviolent resistance. Gandhi's approach to achieving freedom through peaceful protest deeply impressed him. King later said that Christ provided the spirit and Gandhi provided the method. Gandhi's success in leading India's independence movement without violence convinced King that nonviolent resistance could become a powerful tool in the fight for civil rights. While at Crozer, King was also elected class president, becoming the first African-American student to hold that position. Students admired his intellect, character, and calm leadership. He graduated with honors in 1951, earning a Bachelor of Divinity degree. King's educational journey continued at Boston University, where he pursued a Doctor of Philosophy, Ph.D. in systematic theology. In Boston, King encountered a more integrated society than in the South. He lived in a diverse community, attended integrated classes, and interacted with students from many backgrounds. These experiences softened some of the bitterness caused by racial discrimination in his childhood. At Boston University, King studied advanced theology, exploring the works of philosophers and religious scholars from around the world. He studied personalism, a philosophy emphasizing the importance of human dignity and individuality. This idea later became central to his belief system. He also continued his deep study of Gandhi's nonviolence and began formulating how these teachings could be applied to American society. It was during his time in Boston that King met Coretta Scott, a talented singer and student at the New England Conservatory of Music. Their relationship became a major turning point in his personal life and later influenced his public work. Through each stage of his education, from elementary school to his Ph.D., King developed a sharper understanding of the world, strengthened his moral beliefs, and refined his vision for justice. He entered school as a curious child, but left as a thoughtful leader ready to confront the injustice woven into the fabric of American society. His early influences, family guidance, black intellectual traditions, theological insights, and Gandhi philosophy combined to create a powerful foundation. These experiences prepared him for the enormous responsibility he would eventually take on as a leader of the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King Jr.'s path into ministry was not immediate or simple. Although he grew up in a deeply religious household and spent countless hours inside Ebenezer Baptist Church, he initially did not see himself becoming a preacher. As a young man, he envisioned a future in medicine or law, seeking a profession that demanded intellectual challenge. But over time, through reflection, mentorship, and exposure to powerful ideas, King gradually realized that ministry offered something no other field did: the ability to blend spiritual conviction, moral philosophy, and social justice into one powerful mission. During his years at Morehouse College, King began reevaluating his feelings toward the church. A major factor behind this shift was Dr. Benjamin E. Mays, the president of Morehouse, who spoke about religion in a way that went beyond tradition. Mays emphasized that faith required strong moral action and responsibility toward society. His speeches were filled with dignity, reason, and a call for justice. King was deeply moved by Mays' belief that religious leaders must fight racial and economic inequality. These ideas planted the seed of ministry in King's mind. Even with this influence, King did not immediately decide to enter the ministry. He spent significant time reflecting on what kind of life he wanted to lead. He read widely philosophy, theology, ethics, and the more he explored these fields, the more he saw how religion shaped the world around him. He also realized that the church held a unique role within the African American community. It was a source of strength, identity, and unity. As he continued studying moral philosophy, King began to see ministry as a profession where his intellectual interests and passion for justice could come together. King's father, Martin Luther King Sr., had always hoped his son would join the ministry, but he never forced a decision. Instead, he guided King gently, showing him what leadership in a religious community looked like. King observed his father helping families in need, advising troubled members of the congregation, speaking out against injustice, and lifting spirits with powerful sermons. These images made a growing impression on him. By the time King finished his studies at Morehouse, he felt a sense of calling. In 1948, at age 19, King made the decision to enter the ministry. This marked a turning point in his life. That same year, he was ordained as a minister at Ebenezer Baptist Church, standing in the same sacred space where he had grown up. It was both an emotional and symbolic moment. He was joining a tradition that had shaped his entire upbringing. Shortly after, King enrolled in Crozer Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania. This step formally committed him to the path of a religious leader. At Crozer, King explored theology with a seriousness he had not known before. He studied the New Testament, the life of Jesus, and the nature of ethical responsibility. For the first time, he viewed ministry as an intellectual challenge, something deeply philosophical, requiring careful thought and reflection. King's time at Crozer became one of the most transformative periods of his life. The seminary environment was more integrated than the segregated South, and King interacted with students from various racial and religious backgrounds. These experiences broadened his perspective and taught him how to navigate discussions with people who held different beliefs. He excelled academically, often ranking at the top of his class. His professors admired his maturity, analytical ability, and commitment to moral study. King also became involved in student leadership. In 1949, he was elected student body president, becoming the first African American to hold the position. This achievement reflected his growing influence and his ability to communicate across cultural boundaries. During his time at Crozer, King also began shaping his preaching style. He worked on balancing emotional strength with intellectual clarity. His sermons were thoughtful, structured, and filled with moral reasoning. He emphasized compassion, justice, and human dignity, values that would later define his leadership in the civil rights movement. One of the most important developments during his seminary years was King's introduction to philosophy of nonviolence, primarily through his reading of Mahatma Gandhi. King was fascinated by Gandhi's success in using peaceful resistance to challenge oppression in India. He understood that nonviolence was not passive but required immense courage and discipline. Gandhi's teachings convinced King that moral power could overcome physical force. This became one of the pillars of his ministry and future activism. After graduating from Crozer in 1951 with a Bachelor of Divinity degree, King took the next step in his spiritual journey by pursuing a PhD in systematic theology at Boston University. His time in Boston helped him refine his theological ideas. He studied personalism, a philosophical view that emphasizes the worth and dignity of every human being. This belief aligned perfectly with his growing mission to fight for equality. In Boston, King also developed his own theological identity. He combined traditional Christian teachings with modern ethical thought, social justice principles, and philosophy of nonviolence. He started to see ministry not only as a spiritual duty, but as a tool for transforming society. Instead of focusing only on personal salvation, he believed the church should also confront social and political injustice. It was also during this period that King began preaching at various churches around Boston. His sermons attracted many listeners because they were both emotional and intellectually strong. He preached against racism, poverty, and violence, saying that the church must stand on the side of the oppressed. He quickly gained a reputation as a rising young theologian and speaker. By the time King completed his PhD in 1955, he had fully embraced ministry as his life's work. He had developed a unique combination of moral vision, intellectual strength, and powerful communication. These qualities prepared him for the enormous challenge ahead. Shortly after earning his doctorate, King accepted an offer to become the pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. This seemed like a normal career move at the time, but within months it would thrust him into the center of a historic civil rights struggle. His entry into ministry had prepared him spiritually, intellectually, and emotionally for the leadership role he was about to take, one that would change the course of American history. Martin Luther King Jr.'s rise to national prominence began unexpectedly in Montgomery, Alabama. When he moved there in 1954 to become pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, he intended to focus on preaching, community service, and scholarly work. He did not arrive with plans to lead a movement. Yet within a year, events in Montgomery would push him into the center of the struggle for civil rights, and King's leadership, rooted in nonviolence, moral clarity, and disciplined courage, would transform him into a national figure. Montgomery at the time was a deeply segregated city. African Americans made up a large portion of the population, yet they were denied basic rights and treated as second-class citizens. Nowhere was this more visible than on the public bus system, where black riders had to sit the back and give up their seats to white passengers when the bus became crowded. These rules were not merely inconvenient. They were humiliating reminders of an unjust social order. The spark for the bus protest came on December 1st, 1955, when Rosa Parks, a respected seamstress and civil rights activist, refused to give up her seat to a white man. Her quiet act of resistance led to her arrest. Local activists, many of whom had been organizing for years, immediately recognized that Parks's case could unite the community. Leaders like E.D. Nixon of the NAACP contacted King to help coordinate a larger response. King, though still young and relatively new to Montgomery, was seen as someone who could speak with clarity, calm leadership, and moral strength. On December 5th, the day of Parks's trial, thousands of black residents stayed off buses during a one-day protest. That evening, community leaders gathered at Holt Street Baptist Church to discuss the next steps. At this meeting, the Montgomery Improvement Association, MIA, was formed to lead a longer boycott, and King was elected its president. King later said he had not sought the position, but he accepted it as a moral responsibility. His leadership style became clear from the very first speech he delivered that night. The church was overflowing with people who wanted to hear the direction of the movement. King stepped forward and spoke with conviction. We have no alternative but to protest. He emphasized nonviolence, dignity, and the need to transform injustice through peaceful means. His words electrified the audience and united the community. The Montgomery bus boycott officially began the next day. For 381 days, African Americans refused to ride city buses. This was not a small act. It was a massive effort that required organization, sacrifice, and constant coordination. Many people walked miles to work, arranged carpool systems, or relied on taxis driven by black drivers who charged reduced fares. King's home became a headquarters for strategy meetings, phone calls, and planning sessions. He worked day and night, balancing ministry responsibilities with movement leadership. The boycott brought intense pressure on King and other leaders. White supremacist groups threatened the organizers, and King became a prime target. On January 30th, 1956, his home was bombed. His wife, Coretta, and their baby daughter narrowly escaped injury. When angry community members gathered outside his house ready to retaliate, King addressed them with calm authority. He urged them to remain peaceful, reminding them that nonviolence was not only a strategy but a moral obligation. His composure, in that moment, strengthened the movement and showed the nation his unwavering commitment to peaceful resistance. Throughout the boycott, King faced numerous arrests and court cases. Authorities attempted to break the movement by charging him with leading an illegal boycott. King served time in jail, but instead of weakening him, the experience strengthened his resolve. The image of King being taken into custody spread across the country, drawing national attention to Montgomery's struggle. King also met with national civil rights leaders who supported the movement. Figures like Bayard Rustin, Ralph Abernathy, and Joe and Robinson helped strengthen the boycott's strategic foundation. Rustin, in particular, reinforced King's understanding of nonviolent civil disobedience, drawing more deeply from Gandhi's teachings. King studied these methods carefully, shaping them into a uniquely American movement for African American freedom. The boycott eventually reached the courts. In June 1956, a federal district court ruled that bus segregation was unconstitutional. The city of Montgomery appealed, but on November 13, 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court affirmed the decision, declaring segregation on public buses illegal. King and the MIA leaders announced that the boycott would officially end on December 20th, 1956. The next day, King and other leaders rode an integrated bus for the first time, marking a historic victory. The success of the Montgomery bus boycott transformed King from a local pastor into a national figure. Newspapers, magazines, and television stations across the country began covering his speeches and activities. People admired his ability to speak with moral clarity, guide a nonviolent movement, and inspire unity among African Americans. His leadership style, firm, courageous, and peaceful, set a new standard for civil rights activism. Following Montgomery's success, King and other leaders recognized the need for a broader organization to coordinate civil rights efforts across the South. This led to creation of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, in 1957, with King serving as its first president. The SCLC became a major force in the fight for voting rights, desegregation, and equal opportunity, and allowed King to extend his influence far beyond Alabama. Montgomery was not only the beginning of King's rise to fame, it was the moment that defined his purpose. The experience showed him the power of nonviolence, the strength of community, and the impact of moral leadership. He emerged as a symbol of hope for millions and a spokesperson for justice on the national and international stage. The movement in Montgomery also shaped his philosophy. He realized that peaceful protests could change laws, transform communities, and draw global attention. This lesson guided him for the rest of his life. What began as a reaction to a single act of injustice grew into one of the most influential protests in American history. And through it, Martin Luther King Jr. rose from a young pastor to a leader whose vision would inspire generations. After the success of the Montgomery bus boycott, Martin Luther King Jr. emerged as the leading voice of the civil rights movement. But Montgomery was only the beginning. Over the next decade, King led and inspired a series of major campaigns that reshaped American society. These campaigns targeted segregation, voting discrimination, economic injustice, and the deep-rooted racism present across the South. Each campaign was built on nonviolence, discipline, and collective courage, values King believed were essential to transforming a nation. Following Montgomery, King and other leaders established the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, in 1957, with King as president. SCLC's mission was simple but ambitious: to organize nonviolent resistance across the South, using the moral power of churches to challenge segregation. Under King's leadership, the group became the driving force behind many of the most important civil rights actions of the era. One of the first major efforts after Montgomery was the campaign in Albany, Georgia, launched in 1961. Albany had segregation in nearly every aspect of life: parks, buses, libraries, and public facilities. Local activists invited King to join their struggle. The movement in Albany grew quickly, with mass demonstrations, marches, and sit-ins. However, The campaign faced major challenges. Police Chief Laurie Pritchett used a strategy that avoided violence and prevented dramatic scenes that would draw national sympathy. Thousands of protesters, including King, were arrested, but public response remained limited. Although the Albany campaign did not achieve sweeping changes, it became an important learning experience. King realized that for nonviolent campaigns to succeed, they needed clear goals, careful planning, and situations where authorities would likely react with visible brutality, generating public outrage that could pressure lawmakers. This lesson shaped his next major effort. In Birmingham, Alabama, King and the SCLC found all the elements needed for a decisive campaign. Birmingham was known as one of the most segregated and violent cities in America. Its public safety commissioner, Bull Connor, enforced racial segregation with aggressive force. In early 1963, King joined local activists to launch the Birmingham campaign, demanding desegregation of downtown businesses, fair hiring practices, and equal public facilities. The campaign involved sit-ins, boycotts, and mass marches. When adults began to lose jobs or face threats, organizers made the controversial decision to allow children and teenagers to join the protests. This became known as the Children's Crusade. Hundreds of young students marched peacefully, only to be met with police dogs, fire hoses, and mass arrests. The brutal images were broadcast across the nation, shocking Americans and drawing international attention. King himself was arrested during the campaign. While in jail, he wrote the famous letter from Birmingham jail, a powerful defense of nonviolent resistance. In the letter, he argued that waiting for change was no longer acceptable and that unjust laws must be confronted through peaceful action. The Birmingham campaign ultimately forced city leaders to negotiate, leading to desegregation of public facilities and boosting momentum for national civil rights legislation. The success in Birmingham set the stage for more ambitious work. King and the SCLC helped organize the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in 1963, one of the largest political demonstrations in American history. More than 250,000 people gathered at the Lincoln Memorial to demand equality. This was the moment when King delivered his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech, which became the defining message of the civil rights movement. Although this event is covered in detail in a later part, it was deeply connected to the strategic victories of the campaigns King led. Another major campaign took place in St. Augustine, Florida, in 1964. St. Augustine was deeply segregated and hostile to black residents. Local activists asked King to help bring national attention to their struggle. The campaign faced violent opposition from segregationists, including the Ku Klux Klan. Nights were filled with threats, attacks, and intimidation. King was arrested again, but the movement remained firm. Protesters staged sit-ins at segregated hotels and beaches, and the images of police brutality helped build support for the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which became one of the most important laws in American history. Perhaps the most critical campaign King led was in Selma, Alabama, focusing on the right to vote. Although African Americans made up a large portion of Selma's population, the vast majority were blocked from voting through literacy tests, intimidation, and unfair laws. In early 1965, King and the SCLC joined local leaders to organize marches demanding voting rights. The movement faced fierce opposition from local authorities, especially Sheriff Jim Clark, who used violence to crush protests. On March 7, 1965, a peaceful march of activists attempting to walk from Selma to Montgomery was attacked by state troopers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. This event, later known as Bloody Sunday, shocked the nation. Television footage showed troopers beating unarmed marchers with clubs and releasing tear gas into the crowd. The brutality outraged Americans and increased pressure on the government. King called for a second march, attracting thousands of supporters from across the country. Although the marchers turned back after facing police again, they continued organizing. Finally, on March 21st, under federal protection, King led thousands of people on a successful 54-mile march from Selma to Montgomery. This campaign resulted directly in the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which outlawed discriminatory voting practices and transformed American democracy. Beyond these major events, King led campaigns against unemployment, poverty, discrimination in housing, and police violence. He traveled across the country, delivered speeches, held meetings, and worked with local activists. Each campaign required careful planning, strategic thinking, and an unshakable commitment to nonviolence. King's major civil rights campaigns demonstrated his ability to inspire people, challenge injustice, and reshape national policies. Through his leadership, he helped dismantle legal segregation, open the doors to voting rights, and change the moral direction of the United States. These campaigns were not just political actions. They were moral battles for human dignity. By the early 1960s, Martin Luther King Jr. had become one of the most recognized leaders in the civil rights movement. His speeches, nonviolent campaigns, and moral authority positioned him at the center of national conversations about equality. But it was a historic event on August 28, 1963, at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., that elevated him from a national leader to a global symbol of freedom. On that day, during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, King delivered the legendary "I Have a Dream" speech, a message that resonated far beyond the crowd standing before him. The March on Washington was organized by civil rights groups demanding economic justice, equal job opportunities, an end to segregation, and stronger civil rights protections. Leaders like A. Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin, John Lewis, and many others spent months coordinating the event. Their goal was to gather people from across the country to demonstrate mass support for equality. The response exceeded all expectations. More than 250,000 people, black and white, gathered peacefully in front of the Lincoln Memorial, the largest demonstration ever held in the United States at that time. King was scheduled as the final speaker, a position of great significance. Throughout the day, the atmosphere was filled with hope, unity, music, and determination. But it was King who would deliver the message that defined the moment. Standing before the statue of Abraham Lincoln, he began with a tone of seriousness and urgency, speaking about the unfulfilled promises of freedom made a century earlier with the Emancipation Proclamation. His prepared speech was powerful, but the most memorable part, the "I Have a Dream" section, was not originally in the written text. As King spoke, gospel singer Mahalia Jackson, seated near him, called out, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." Inspired, King shifted from his notes and began improvising the famous lines. His voice grew stronger, more rhythmic, echoing the cadence of church sermons from his childhood. He painted a picture of a nation where justice flowed freely, where black children and white children played together, where freedom was universal, and where people were judged by their character rather than their skin color. His words transformed the moment into something timeless. The speech blended moral truth, poetic imagery, and spiritual power, capturing the heart of the movement. The impact of the speech was immediate and enormous. Newspapers featured it on front pages. Television broadcasts played it repeatedly. People across the United States, including those who had never supported the civil rights movement, felt moved by King's message. Politicians, including President John F. Kennedy, recognized the pressure and urgency the speech added to the call for national civil rights legislation. But the March on Washington was more than a single speech. It was a turning point. It demonstrated that the civil rights movement had become a national force with broad support. It also directly contributed to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed segregation in schools, workplaces, and public facilities. King played an important role in advocating for the bill, working with lawmakers, and using his influence to push for strong federal action. The success of the march expanded King's influence beyond the civil rights community. He became recognized internationally as a champion of nonviolence and human rights. In 1964, he traveled to Norway to accept the Nobel Peace Prize, becoming the youngest person ever to receive the award at that time. His acceptance speech emphasized the global struggle for freedom, connecting the American fight against racism to broader issues of poverty, war, and inequality. King's national impact was not limited to legislation. His speeches and writings changed the way Americans thought about justice and morality. He challenged people to confront prejudice within themselves, not just in government policies. His message influenced churches, universities, labor unions, and communities across the country. His philosophy of nonviolence spread to other movements, shaping the activism of future generations. After the March on Washington, King continued traveling across the nation. He spoke at churches, colleges, community meetings, and rallies. Everywhere he went, he urged people to remain committed to peaceful protest. even in the face of violence. His voice reminded Americans that the struggle was not only for legal rights, but also for dignity and human equality. King also began addressing economic justice. He believed that true equality required more than desegregation. It required access to jobs, fair wages, and opportunities. He spoke against the growing gap between rich and poor, arguing that economic injustice was a threat to all Americans. This idea became a central theme in the later years of his activism. The "I Have a Dream" speech, however, remained the symbol of his message. School children memorized its lines. Civil rights supporters quoted it in meetings. International leaders referred to it when discussing freedom movements in their own countries. King's dream became a shared vision, carried forward by millions. Even those who disagreed with him could not deny the power of his words. His ability to connect moral truths with national values made him a respected figure across political and cultural lines. The speech became a defining moment, not only in his life, but also in American history. Over time, the message of the dream began shaping how the nation remembered the civil rights movement. It became the emotional and spiritual anchor of the struggle, reminding people what the movement was ultimately fighting for, a society where equality and justice were realities, not promises. The national impact of the "I Have a Dream" moment cannot be overstated. It solidified King's role as a voice of the movement, inspired legislative change, expanded global awareness of American racism, and set a moral standard for future leaders. His dream continues to influence political speeches, educational discussions, and social movements around the world. That day at the Lincoln Memorial was more than a speech. It was a turning point in the conscience of a nation. As Martin Luther King Jr.'s influence grew, so did the complexity of the challenges he faced. His political views expanded beyond the early focus on desegregation, leading him into deeper, more controversial territory. He confronted not only racist structures, but also divisions within the civil rights movement, criticism from political leaders, deep surveillance from the government, and rising tensions as America struggled with social and political change. Part 8 explores King's evolving political views and the intense opposition that followed. By the mid-1960s, King had become more than a civil rights leader. He was a national moral critic. His early political position centered primarily on ending segregation in public life. But as he witnessed the interconnectedness of racism, poverty, and violence, his views broadened. He began speaking openly about economic injustice, political inequality, and the moral failures of the American government. This expansion of focus placed him in conflict with both allies and enemies. One key shift came after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. These victories were historic, but King recognized that legal changes alone would not end discrimination. He began pushing for deeper structural reforms. He argued that African Americans remained trapped in poverty due to economic inequality, lack of access to quality education, unemployment, and housing discrimination. He stressed that civil rights without economic rights would only create partial freedom. King's call for economic justice led him to support policies such as a guaranteed minimum income, federal job programs, and the redistribution of resources to uplift poor communities. Many political leaders, including President Lyndon B. Johnson, who had once strongly supported him, became uncomfortable with these demands. Johnson was particularly sensitive because he was heavily involved in the Vietnam War, which consumed government funds. King's criticism of economic inequality indirectly challenged the administration's priorities. Another major turning point came when King publicly opposed the Vietnam War. This was perhaps the most controversial decision of his career. In 1967, he delivered the famous speech titled "Beyond Vietnam," a time to break silence, in which he condemned the war as unjust, immoral, and harmful to both Americans and Vietnamese civilians. He argued that the war diverted funds away from anti-poverty programs and that young black men were being sent to fight for freedoms abroad that they still did not fully enjoy at home. Many people, including civil rights allies, were upset by this stance. Some leaders felt that speaking against the war would damage the movement's relationship with the White House. Newspapers criticized him, calling his comments reckless and harmful. Even some supporters believed he should stay focused solely on civil rights. But King refused to separate justice at home from justice abroad. He believed that true morality required condemning violence wherever it occurred. This anti-war position caused a severe backlash. President Johnson distanced himself from King, ending the cooperative relationship they once had. Government officials and public commentators painted King as unpatriotic. The FBI increased its surveillance and attempts to discredit him. In fact, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, had already been watching King for years. Hoover believed King was dangerous because of his influence and feared the rise of a black leader who could unify people across racial lines. The FBI launched CONTLPRO, a covert program designed to undermine activists. King was one of its major targets. Agents monitored his phones, recorded private conversations, spread rumors, and attempted to damage his reputation. King knew he was under surveillance, but he refused to let it deter his work. Within the civil rights movement itself, King faced growing criticism. Some younger activists, especially those in groups like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, felt that nonviolence was too slow and too passive in the face of increasing violence against black people. Leaders like Stokely Carmichael began promoting black power, emphasizing self-defense, pride, and stronger resistance. They believed that King's message of nonviolence appealed too much to white liberals and relied too heavily on moral persuasion. King respected the younger activists but disagreed with the idea that violence or isolation would lead to lasting freedom. He believed that nonviolence remained the most effective and morally correct approach. Yet the growing division within the movement made his leadership more complicated. King also faced increasing opposition from segregationists and white supremacists. Groups like the Ku Klux Klan continued to threaten him, bomb black churches, and attack marchers. Even moderate white politicians criticized him for demanding too much, too fast. They argued that social change should be gradual. King rejected this viewpoint, insisting that justice delayed was justice denied. Another political challenge was the struggle for support in northern cities. King found that racism was not limited to the South. When he led the Chicago Freedom Movement in 1966 to fight housing discrimination, he encountered intense resistance from white residents and local politicians. Crowds threw bricks, bottles, and rocks at him during marches. King said he had never faced such hostility, not even in the Deep South. This experience strengthened his belief that racism was a national problem, not a Southern one. Despite the criticism and danger, King continued pushing forward. He understood that leadership required standing firm, even when it was unpopular. His political views became more radical as he recognized the deeper systems of injustice in society. He spoke about the triple evils: racism, economic exploitation, and militarism. He argued that these forces work together to keep millions of people oppressed. These expanded political beliefs shaped King's later projects, including the Poor People's Campaign, which aimed to unite people of all races against poverty. But this broader, more ambitious vision brought even more opposition. King's willingness to challenge a nation's conscience, its politics, its wars, its economic priorities, made him a powerful and controversial figure. He refused to limit his message to comfortable topics. He believed that justice required speaking the full truth, even when it was painful. Behind Martin Luther King Jr.'s public role as a national leader was a deeply personal world shaped by love, family, discipline, and the emotional weight of constant struggle. His personal life reveals the human being behind the speeches, the husband, father, friend, and son who carried enormous responsibility while trying to maintain normalcy. Understanding these relationships helped show the full picture of who King was beyond the movement. King met Coretta Scott in Boston in 1952 while he was studying at Boston University. Coretta, a gifted singer and student at the New England Conservatory of Music, impressed King immediately with her intelligence, strength, and commitment to social justice. Their early conversations were filled with ideas about activism, philosophy, and the future. King admired her independence and her determination to have her own identity. Coretta, meanwhile, appreciated King's deep sense of purpose and his gentle, thoughtful nature. They married on June 18, 1953, at the Scott family home in Alabama. Their marriage blended partnership, love, and sacrifice. From the beginning, Coretta understood that King's life would be filled with risk and responsibility. She embraced this reality, becoming not only a supportive spouse, but also an active participant in the movement. She sang at rallies, marched alongside protesters, and stood by King during periods of danger and pressure. King and Coretta had 4 children. Yolanda Denise King, born 1955. Martin Luther King III, born 1957. Dexter Scott King, born 1961. Bernice Albertine King, born 1963. King adored his children, despite his demanding schedule. He tried to spend as much time with them as possible. He played with them, read stories, and encouraged them to dream boldly. But the reality of the movement often kept them away from home for long periods. Coretta later said she carried many responsibilities alone, balancing motherhood with activism. King struggled with guilt about missing milestones and leaving his family constantly. Yet he believed that his work was ultimately for their future and for all children across the country. King's personal life was also shaped by his relationship with his parents. His father, Martin Luther King Sr., remained a powerful influence throughout his life. Even as King became a national leader, he often sought advice from his father. They shared deep respect and a common commitment to justice. His mother, Alberta Williams King, continued to provide emotional comfort and moral grounding. King remained close to his siblings, Christine and A.D., who supported him and joined the movement in various ways. Friendship played a major role in his personal world. King had a circle of advisors and companions who helped him navigate the intense challenges of leadership. Ralph Abernathy was one of his closest confidants. Their friendship began during the Montgomery bus boycott and grew into a lifelong bond. Abernathy stood beside King in almost every major campaign, offering loyalty, strategic insight, and emotional support. Others, like Bayard Rustin, Andrew Young, and Hosea Williams, became essential members of his inner circle. However, King's personal life was not free from strain. The constant pressure of the movement, the threats against his family, and the emotional weight of being a national symbol created stress. King often struggled with exhaustion, fear, and moments of self-doubt. He faced criticism from all sides: politicians, journalists, activists, and segregationists. These pressures sometimes created tension within his marriage and tested his emotional resilience. Despite these struggles, King maintained a deep commitment to nonviolence in both public and private life. He tried to live with humility, patience, and empathy. His spirituality was a central part of his personal world. Prayer, scripture reading, and quiet reflection guided him through difficult decisions. He believed that moral integrity was essential for anyone leading a movement rooted in justice. King also valued music. He grew up surrounded by church hymns and gospel songs. Music helped him calm his mind, find focus, and maintain emotional strength. During stressful moments, he often hummed hymns or listened to gospel recordings. Music connected him to his childhood and offered peace during turbulent times. Throughout his life, King carried the burden of constant danger. His home was bombed. He received daily death threats. He worried for his wife and children. At times, he felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of leading millions of people. In private moments, he admitted feeling fear, but he refused to let fear control him. His courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep going despite it. King's relationship with Coretta remained strong even under immense pressure. She became increasingly active in the movement, often stepping into leadership roles when King was jailed or traveling. Coretta also encouraged him to broaden his activism beyond racial equality to include global peace and economic justice. She shared his belief in nonviolence and supported his anti-war stance, even when it caused political backlash. As King became more vocal about poverty, war, and structural inequality, his public responsibilities grew heavier. Yet at home, he tried to remain a loving husband and father. His children remember him as gentle, playful, and affectionate. He wanted them to understand love and equality, even though they also saw how hatred in society targeted their family. By the late 1960s, King was preparing for the Poor People's Campaign, a project aimed at uniting people of all races against poverty. This campaign reflected his deepest beliefs about humanity and justice. However, it also placed additional stress on his personal life, as he traveled constantly and pushed himself to meet growing expectations. Throughout all the challenges, political, emotional, and personal, King remained committed to living a life rooted in love and justice. His personal relationships were both a source of strength and a reminder of what he was fighting for. The love he received from his family and close friends shaped his resilience, and the sacrifices they made alongside him formed an essential part of his story. Martin Luther King Jr. was not only a leader, he was a man with hopes, fears, laughter, and love. His personal life reveals a deeper dimension of his character, one built on compassion, dedication, and an unwavering belief in human dignity. The final years of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life were some of the most intense, challenging, and transformative periods of his leadership. Though he had achieved historic victories, such as the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act, King increasingly felt that the deeper struggles, poverty, economic inequality, political division, and the impact of war remained unresolved. His focus expanded during these years, and this expansion brought both new followers and new enemies. It was during this period that he faced the greatest pressure, the harshest criticism, and ultimately the threat that would end his life. After the Selma to Montgomery marches and the passing of the Voting Rights Act in 1965, King recognized that racism was not the only force affecting African Americans. He spoke openly about the connection between racial injustice and economic oppression. He saw that many black families remained trapped in poverty despite the new legal rights they gained. He began pushing for broader structural changes, fair wages, affordable housing, union protections, and economic programs to support the poor of all races. One of King's most ambitious efforts was the Chicago Freedom Movement in 1966, where he addressed housing discrimination in northern cities. King's arrival in Chicago revealed the harsh reality that racism was not confined to the South. The hostility he faced surprised even him. Angry crowds threw rocks and bottles at him during marches. King later said he had never encountered such violent hatred, not even in Mississippi or Alabama. Though the campaign forced some agreements from city officials, it ultimately revealed how deeply rooted economic and racial inequality was in the North. At the same time, the national landscape was changing. Younger activists in groups like SNCC and the Black Panthers began promoting more militant approaches. They believed King's insistence on nonviolence was outdated and too slow. King respected their frustration but disagreed with violent strategies, insisting that moral change must guide political change. Still, the growing division created tension within the movement and reduced the unified power that had characterized earlier campaigns. King's political views also placed him in conflict with the U.S. government, especially during the Vietnam War. In 1967, he publicly condemned the war in his speech Beyond Vietnam, arguing that the violence abroad contradicted America's claims of promoting peace and freedom. He said, "A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death." This speech marked a major shift. King went from being seen as a civil rights leader to a broader critic of American policy. Many politicians, journalists, and even some civil rights allies reacted negatively. President Lyndon B. Johnson, who had once worked closely with King, felt betrayed and distanced himself. Newspapers called King a troublemaker for speaking against the war, and donations to the SCLC declined. Yet King refused to remain silent. He believed moral integrity required telling the truth, even when it was unpopular. He felt the war harmed both Vietnamese civilians and poor Americans, especially black soldiers sent to fight abroad. His anti-war stance intensified his opposition and made him a target for even more surveillance and political pressure. By 1967, King began planning the Poor People's Campaign, a national movement to demand economic justice through peaceful demonstrations in Washington, D.C. His goal was to unite poor people of all backgrounds, black, white, Latino, Native American, and Asian American, in a coalition demanding better housing, jobs, and living conditions. King believed this campaign was the next phase of the civil rights struggle and essential to achieving true equality. But as King moved into 1968, the pressure around him became immense. He was exhausted from constant travel, emotional stress, and threats. The FBI continued to monitor him aggressively, trying to undermine his moral authority. Friends later said King seemed tired and burdened, yet he remained committed to finishing his work. In March 1968, King traveled to Memphis, Tennessee, to support a strike by African-American sanitation workers. The workers were protesting unsafe conditions, unfair wages, and unequal treatment. King saw their struggle as an example of the larger economic injustices he had been fighting against. His presence brought national attention to their cause. King planned to lead a peaceful march in Memphis, but the first attempt ended in violence when a group of young protesters broke away from the main march and clashed with police. The media blamed King, claiming his nonviolent strategy had failed. Determined to demonstrate that nonviolence remained powerful, King returned to Memphis to lead a second march. On the night of April 3, 1968, King delivered his final speech at the Mason Temple Church. The speech, later known as "I've Been to Mountaintop," was prophetic and emotional. King spoke about threats to his life, acknowledging he might not live to see the results of their work. Yet he remained calm and hopeful, saying, "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." Listeners felt the weight of his words, sensing that he was speaking from a place of deep spiritual insight. The next evening, on April 4, 1968, King stood on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis. He was preparing to go to dinner with friends when a gunshot rang out. A bullet struck him in the neck. He collapsed instantly. Friends rushed to his side, but the wound was fatal. King was pronounced dead at 7:05 p.m. at St. Joseph's Hospital. The news of his assassination shook the world. Cities across the United States erupted in grief, anger, and riots. Millions mourned the loss of a leader who had dedicated his life to peace, justice, and equality. His death marked the end of one of the most influential voices of the 20th century. Though King was gone, his vision endured. The Poor People's Campaign continued, and his legacy influenced countless movements for justice around the world. His assassination did not end his mission. It strengthened it, inspiring future generations to continue the work he began. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy extends far beyond his lifetime, shaping not only American society, but also global movements for justice. His ideas, actions, and moral leadership continue to influence politics, education, activism, and cultural conversations. The decades following his death proved that his work did not end in Memphis. His message spread, evolved, and inspired millions long after he was gone. Immediately after King's assassination in 1968, there was a nationwide outpouring of grief. Cities across the United States held memorials, and hundreds of thousands attended funeral services in Atlanta. Leaders from around the world sent condolences, acknowledging the loss of a moral giant. But beyond mourning, there was also a renewed commitment to the values King had lived for: equality, dignity, and nonviolence. One of the earliest impacts of King's death was the acceleration of legislative progress. In 1968, Congress passed the Fair Housing Act, a law King had strongly supported during the Chicago Freedom Movement. The act sought to end housing discrimination against racial minorities. Many lawmakers admitted that the shock of King's assassination pushed the bill forward, demonstrating how even in death, he moved the nation toward justice. As the years passed, King's contributions gained widespread recognition. In 1983, President Ronald Reagan signed a bill establishing Martin Luther King Jr. Day as a federal holiday. The holiday is observed every January, near King's birthday on the 15th. It became the first U.S. holiday honoring an African American and symbolizes the nation's acknowledgement of his lasting influence. Today, MLK Day is not only a time of remembrance, but also a national day of service, reflecting King's belief that helping others is essential to a just society. King's memorialization expanded internationally as well. Streets, schools, and foundations across the world were named after him. Statues were built in nations far beyond the United States, showing global appreciation for his philosophy of nonviolent resistance. His message resonated with freedom movements in South Africa, India, Eastern Europe, and Latin America. Leaders like Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, and Václav Havel cited King's ideas as inspirations for their own struggles against injustice. The opening of the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historical Park in Atlanta further cemented his memory. The site includes his childhood home, Ebenezer Baptist Church, and the King Center for Nonviolent Social Change, an organization established by Coretta Scott King to preserve her husband's teachings. The King Center promotes nonviolent conflict resolution, social justice education, and community empowerment. Over the years, millions have visited the site to learn about King's life and legacy. In 2011, The Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial was unveiled on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., standing tall, overlooking the Tidal Basin. The monument honors King's commitment to freedom and equality. It is the first memorial on the National Mall dedicated to an African American and serves as a powerful reminder of his role in shaping the nation's moral direction. The monument features quotes from his speeches, reflecting his enduring vision of justice. Beyond honors and memorials, King's influence remains deeply rooted in ongoing social movements. His philosophy of nonviolence became a guiding principle for activists fighting for racial justice, LGBTQ+ rights, workers' rights, immigrant rights, and global human rights. Protesters around the world often use his words, teachings, and strategies. His speeches, especially I Have a Dream, Letter from Birmingham Jail, and I've Been to Mountaintop, remain among the most studied writings in modern history. King's legacy also shaped academic fields. Universities created African American studies, peace studies, and social justice programs influenced by his writings. Scholars continue to analyze his speeches, theological perspectives, and political strategies. His work is taught in schools across the United States from elementary to graduate levels, ensuring that each generation learns about the principles he fought for. King's long-term influence is seen in how Americans understand civil rights today. Public opinion shifted dramatically from the 1960s to later decades. Ideas that were once considered radical, like ending segregation, equal voting rights, and interracial integration, are now accepted as fundamental principles of a democratic society. King played a major role in this transformation by focusing on moral clarity and universal justice. Despite his widespread praise today, history shows that King was deeply controversial in his time, especially during his final years. But this complexity adds depth to his legacy. People now recognize that true leadership often requires challenging systems, confronting discomfort, and standing firm even when criticized. King's bravery in speaking against war, poverty, and inequality became part of his lasting message. King's children, Yolanda, Martin III, Dexter, and Bernice, also carried forward elements of his legacy. They became advocates for justice, served in leadership roles at the King Center, and promoted their father's philosophy of nonviolence. Coretta Scott King continued activism until her death in 2006, ensuring that her husband's mission expanded into global human rights work. More than half a century after his assassination, King's legacy continues to shape the national conscience. Debates about police reform, voting rights, economic inequality, and racial justice frequently invoke his name. Movements like Black Lives Matter draw directly from his principles of peaceful protest and moral resistance. King's dream of a society free from discrimination continues to guide both activists and policymakers. Global leaders still quote him as a moral standard. His teachings remain relevant because they speak to universal human values: freedom, equality, compassion, and justice. King believed that humanity was interconnected and that injustice anywhere was a threat to justice everywhere. This idea became a cornerstone of modern human rights philosophy. Ultimately, Martin Luther King Jr.'s long-term influence can be measured not only by laws changed or monuments built, but by the continued effort to realize his dream. His vision calls people across the world to fight injustice with courage, to pursue peace with determination, and to believe that moral truth can overcome violence and hatred. King did not live to see the full realization of his dream, but his legacy continues to light the path forward. His life remains a testament to the power of nonviolent resistance, the strength of moral conviction, and enduring hope for a just and equal world.